There's a mistake that deeply feeling women often make in love. A mistake that destroys relationships before they even have a chance to begin. And what's truly unsettling is that they're often completely unaware they're making it. They believe they're loving in the right way. They think they're giving their best, but it's precisely this best that pushes away the very people they desire most. Jung identified this pattern over a century ago. He called it Animus projection, and Huberman, in his lab at Stanford, has demonstrated that this pattern literally reconfigures the brain's circuitry. The result is devastating, brilliant, sensitive, profound women end up alone or stuck in relationships that diminish them, and no one really explains why, until now. Over the next few minutes, you're going to understand something that most women never discover about themselves, something that explains why your relationships follow the same destructive pattern, why you attract men who can't meet your emotional depth, why the more you love, the emptier you feel, and more importantly, you'll learn exactly what to do to break this cycle, not with superficial advice, but with the science behind your passionate brain. Let's start with what Jung discovered about the feminine psyche, something he wrote about way back in 1921, but that modern psychology has largely ignored for decades. Jung observed that every woman carries within her an unconscious masculine figure. He called this figure the Animus. This isn't just some poetic metaphor. It's a real psychic structure that influences thoughts, emotions, and especially romantic choices. The Animus is formed from early childhood. The relationship with her father, with male authority figures, with the broader culture, all of this molds this internal image of the masculine. And here's the problem. When the Animus isn't recognized, it's projected. The woman doesn't see the real man in front of her. She sees an idealized version, created by her own psyche. Jung was blunt about this. He wrote that a woman projects her Animus onto her partner and expects him to be the bearer of all the qualities she unconsciously attributes to this figure, when the real man inevitably fails to live up to this impossible image. The disappointment is devastating, but hold on, because what Huberman has uncovered about the brain takes this even deeper than Jung ever imagined. In November of 2024, Dr. Alan Shaw appeared on the Huberman Lab podcast to explain something revolutionary. He showed that the first 24 months of life determine how your brain processes relationships for the rest of your existence. The right hemisphere of the brain, which dominates early development, creates attachment patterns that become automatic. Shaw explained that there are three main patterns: secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and anxious attachment. And here's the connection that no one is making. Anxious attachment style, which affects millions of women, is the exact neurological manifestation of the unintegrated animus that Jung described. Think about it. A woman with an anxious attachment style exhibits constant hypervigilance. She obsessively monitors her partner's signals, interprets silence as rejection, needs constant reassurance, feels like something is wrong, even when everything is fine. Huberman explained in episode 59 that the nervous systems of these individuals were calibrated in childhood for a permanent state of alert. The amygdala, the region of the brain that processes threats, is constantly activated. The posterior cingulate cortex, which monitors the environment, maintains a hyperactive connection with the fear centers. This means that loving intensely for these women isn't a choice. It's a neurological compulsion. Their brains literally don't know how to function any other way. And here's the part that most therapists don't connect. Jung wrote that when a woman projects her animus onto a man, she creates a relationship marked by intense highs and lows, animosity mixed with sentimentality. A union that often leaves the couple emotionally exhausted. Observe the correlation. The anxious attachment pattern described by modern neuroscience exhibits exactly these characteristics. Extreme emotional swings, moments of intense connection followed by crises of insecurity. a cycle that seems impossible to break. It's no coincidence. Jung mapped psychologically what Huberman has validated neurologically. They are two perspectives on the same phenomenon. But why are deeply feeling women more vulnerable to this pattern? Here's what no one explains. Emotional intensity is a strength, the ability to feel deeply, to connect on levels that other people can't even imagine, to love with your whole being. This isn't a flaw, it's a gift. The problem isn't the intensity itself. The problem is how that intensity is directed. When a deeply feeling woman hasn't integrated her animus, all that emotional force is channeled outward, toward the other person, toward the search for external validation, toward the attempt to fill a void with someone else's love. A void that can only be filled internally. Jung was clear about this. The unintegrated animus functions as a guardian, standing between the woman and her own spiritual depth, while she seeks externally what only exists internally. She remains disconnected from her true power, and Huberman has proven that this external search has a real neurological cost. Studies from 2024 using functional neuroimaging have shown that people with anxious attachment exhibit increased activation in brain regions associated with affective appraisal. In other words, the brains of these individuals are constantly evaluating whether they are loved enough, constantly looking for signs of approval or rejection. This generates chronic stress. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, the system that regulates cortisol, functions dysfunctionally. Elevated cortisol levels become the norm, and elevated cortisol affects cognition, mood, and physical health. The deeply feeling woman who loves too much isn't just suffering emotionally. She's literally damaging her body and brain in the process. But here's what changes everything. Let me tell you about a client that Jung worked with. He didn't reveal her name, but he described the case in detail. She was an extremely talented woman, intelligent, sensitive, capable of profound insights. But her relationships were one disaster after another. She fell in love intensely, idealized her partner. And when reality set in, the collapse was brutal. Jung observed that she wasn't relating to real men. She was relating to an internal image that she projected onto them. And that image was perfect, impossible to live up to. The pattern repeated itself because she never looked inward. All her energy was focused on finding the right man, when in reality, the journey was to integrate her own internal masculine, now. Let's compare that to what modern neuroscience has discovered about relationship patterns. In 2024, researchers published a study using electroencephalography to predict attachment styles. What they found was revealing. People with an anxious attachment style show increased amplitudes in specific brain components during emotional regulation tasks. The brain is working harder. It's making more effort, but this extra effort doesn't produce calm. It produces exhaustion. The study showed that pupil dilation, a marker of cognitive effort, is significantly greater in people with high attachment anxiety when trying to reevaluate emotional situations. In other words, they're constantly trying to calm themselves down, but their nervous system isn't cooperating. This explains why deeply feeling women feel like they're always swimming upstream. It's not a lack of effort. It's a nervous system configured for a state of emergency. And here's the connection that almost no one makes. Jung described how an unintegrated animus keeps a woman in a constant state of internal tension. She never fully relaxes. She's always vigilant, always searching. That's exactly what neuroscience calls anxious attachment. But the story doesn't end there, because there's an even more disturbing discovery. Researchers have found that the posterior cingulate cortex, a brain region associated with self-awareness and monitoring the environment, shows an abnormally strong connection with the amygdala in people with anxious attachment. What does this mean in practice? It means that the part of the brain that asks, "Who am I?" is constantly connected to the part that detects danger. The identity of these people is fused with threat. Every romantic interaction is experienced as a risk. Every silence from their partner is processed as potential abandonment. The brain can't distinguish safety from danger. Everything feels threatening. Jung sensed this decades before neuroscience confirmed it. He wrote that a woman with an unintegrated animus lives in a state of partial possession. The archetype dominates her instead of serving her. She has no control over her emotional reactions because an unconscious force is in command. Jung's unconscious force is Huberman's hyperactive circuitry. They're two languages describing the same phenomenon. But hold on, because here comes the part that offers real hope. Jung discovered that the animus has 4 stages of development, and most women remain stuck in the first 2. The first stage is the animus as physical power, attraction to brute strength, protection, material security. The second stage is the animus as action and initiative, attraction to accomplished, conquering men who make things happen. In these 2 stages, the woman is still seeking externally, still projecting, still depending on the other person to feel complete. The third stage is the animus as word and logos. Here, the woman begins to value communication, intellectual depth, the ability to articulate ideas. There's already movement toward integration. The fourth stage is the animus as spiritual meaning. At this level, the woman has integrated her internal masculine energy. She no longer needs to project. She can see the real man without the filters of the unconscious. She can love without dependence. Jung wrote that when a woman reaches the 4th stage, no external person can permanently contain the image of the animus, because that image has been reabsorbed, integrated. It has become a conscious part of the psyche. And here's the neurological connection that Huberman validated. Research from 2025 has demonstrated that attachment styles exist on a spectrum and can be modified. Neuroplasticity allows circuits formed in childhood to be rebuilt. It's not easy. It's not fast. But it is possible. Huberman explained that the key lies in regulating the autonomic nervous system. When a woman learns to get out of the state of hypervigilance, when she develops self-regulation skills, when she can calm her own amygdala without needing someone else, something profound changes. She stops looking outside for what only exists inside. And that's exactly what Jung described as animus integration. Now, you might be wondering, how do I do this in practice? How do I break out of this pattern that seems so automatic? The first thing is recognition. As long as you don't admit that this pattern exists, you can't change it. Observe your past relationships. Look for the moment when intensity turned into dependence. Identify the impossible expectations you placed on your partners. Jung said that making the unconscious conscious is the first step toward any transformation. You need to see the animus before you can integrate it. The second thing is nervous system regulation. Huberman has presented specific techniques for this. The physiological sigh, 2 short inhales through the nose, followed by a long exhale through the mouth, activates the parasympathetic system immediately. Practiced regularly, this exercise recalibrates the nervous system. But it's not enough to do the technique in moments of crisis. You need to train daily. Create a base of calm that doesn't depend on someone else. The third thing is developing emotional self-sufficiency. This doesn't mean isolation. It means the ability to regulate your own emotions before seeking co-regulation. Alan Shaw explained on the Huberman Lab podcast that people with anxious attachment chronically seek co-regulation. They need someone else to calm them down. They haven't developed sufficient internal circuits for this. The solution is to build those circuits through contemplative practices, through gradual exposure to solitude, through learning to be with yourself without that meaning abandonment. The fourth thing is recognizing the real man, not the projection. When you realize you're idealizing, stop. Ask yourself, who is this person really? What are their real flaws and what can they offer? And what can't they? Jung said that animus projection creates love at first sight. That feeling that you found the perfect person, that you're finally complete. That feeling is a warning sign, not a sign of true connection. The fifth thing is accepting that integration is a process. It doesn't happen all at once. There will be relapses. moments when you'll revert to the old pattern. That's part of it. Huberman explained that neuroplasticity requires repetition. New circuits don't form instantly. You need to practice consistently until the new pattern becomes automatic. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you something. This content you're watching doesn't exist anywhere else. Not because I invented it. It's because few people have the courage to connect Jung with neuroscience honestly. Academia keeps these disciplines separate. Therapists avoid Huberman. Neuroscientists ignore Jung. Each video like this takes hours of research, connections that need to be verified, translation between two completely different languages. If this is making a difference for you, if you're understanding your patterns in a new way, the super thanks button down below is your way of saying keep revealing. It's not about money. It's about making this work of synthesis possible, work that the academic system refuses to do. When you click that golden heart, you're funding the next revelation. You're part of a movement of people who demand depth instead of superficiality. Now let's continue with something that will clarify even more. There's a crucial difference between loving intensely and loving anxiously. And most people get them confused. Loving intensely is the capacity for deep connection. It's a gift. It's strength. It doesn't need to be cured. It needs to be directed correctly. Loving anxiously is emotional dependence. It's fear disguised as love. It's a desperate search for validation. That is what needs to be transformed. The mistake that deeply feeling women make isn't feeling too much. It's directing that capacity to feel to the wrong place, outward instead of inward, toward others instead of toward themselves. Jung explained that the integrated animus allows women to access territories of their own psyche that were previously unconscious. She reclaims power that was projected outward, becomes more complete, more autonomous. Paradoxically, this also makes her more capable of loving truly, because now she doesn't need the other person to feel whole. She can choose to love instead of needing to love. She can offer love as abundance instead of seeking love as a deficiency. Huberman has validated this neurologically. When the circuits of internal regulation are developed, a person no longer needs constant external stimuli to feel good. Dopamine isn't tied exclusively to another person. Oxytocin can be generated through other sources. This completely changes the dynamics of relationships. The woman who has integrated her animus doesn't push men away with intensity. She attracts them because intensity without dependence is magnetic. Depth without desperation is irresistible. And here is the paradox that Jung identified. When you stop searching so desperately, everything starts to come to you, not because the universe rewards detachment, but because you're finally available to receive. While all your energy is directed outward, there's no space for anything to enter. When you gather that energy, integrate your animus, develop self-regulation, a healthy emptiness is created, and that emptiness attracts. Neuroscience confirms this. People with secure attachment styles, whom Huberman described as capable of efficiently alternating between self-regulation and seeking support, are more attractive in studies. Partners perceive them as more trustworthy. Relationships with them last longer. It's not a mystery, it's science. Jung mapped it psychologically. Huberman validated it biologically. Now I want to talk about something that few people mention: the role of the body in this process. Anxious attachment isn't just in the mind. It's inscribed in the body, in the nervous system, in patterns of muscle tension, in shallow breathing, in posture. Huberman explained that emotional states create bodily states and vice versa. You can't change deep mental patterns just by thinking about them. You also need to work at the physical level. Practices like controlled breathing, cold exposure, intense physical exercise. All of these recalibrate the nervous system. They create a different physiological foundation upon which new emotions can emerge. Jung intuitively knew this. He recommended that his clients not only analyze dreams, but also move, create, express themselves through the body. The integration of the animus isn't just mental, it's somatic. A woman who trains her body for calm, who develops the ability to regulate through physical practices, is building the biological foundation for new relational patterns. And that leads us to the integrated protocol that unites Jung and Huberman. In the morning, before interacting with any screen or person, 10 minutes of nervous system regulation practice. It can be breathing, it can be sun exposure, it can be exercise. The goal is to establish a solid internal state before facing external stimuli. During the day, whenever you notice the tendency to seek external validation, pause, do the physiological sigh. Ask yourself, what am I looking for that only exists within me? At night, practice reflection. It can be writing. It can be meditation. It can be dream analysis, as Jung recommended. The goal is to process the day, identify moments of projection, recognize patterns. Weekly, time for intentional solitude. Not solitude as punishment, solitude as practice. Time to be with yourself without needing anyone. This strengthens self-regulation circuits. This protocol isn't theory. It's a synthesis of 100 years of Jung with the latest discoveries from Stanford. It's what works. But let me tell you what happens when a woman really does this work. I want to talk about the 3 stages of transformation that Jung observed in his clients who managed to integrate the animus. The first stage is pattern recognition. The woman realizes that she's projecting, sees the idealization happening, but still can't stop. It's like watching herself repeat the same mistake. Frustration is normal at this stage. Huberman would explain this as the moment when the prefrontal cortex begins to create new connections with the emotional centers. Consciousness is there, but the automatic circuits still dominate. It's a period of intense internal conflict. The second stage is active interruption. The woman starts to pause before reacting. When she feels the urge to seek validation, she manages to breathe first. When she notices the idealization starting, she manages to question it. She still feels the impulses, but isn't dominated by them. Neurologically, this is the stage where new neural networks are forming. Neuroplasticity is happening. Every time the woman chooses to respond instead of reacting, she strengthens the new circuits. It's laborious. It requires energy, but each repetition counts. The third stage is genuine integration. The woman no longer needs to make a conscious effort not to project. The new pattern has become automatic. She sees men as they are, not as her psyche needs them to be. She can love intensely without losing herself. She can be alone without feeling abandoned. Jung described women who reach this stage as having a different quality of presence. They radiate something. They don't need to seek because they already have. They don't need to fill because they're already complete. Huberman would validate this as a state where the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems are in balance, where the amygdala isn't chronically activated, where baseline cortisol levels are healthy. It's a state of inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Now, how long does it take to get there? Honestly, it varies. Jung saw transformations happen in months for some clients and in years for others. Huberman explains that neuroplasticity is real, but it's not instantaneous. The adult brain does change, but it changes gradually. What matters isn't the speed, it's the direction. Each day practicing the protocols is a day closer to integration. Each moment of awareness is a new neural connection. And there's something else I need to tell you about this process. It doesn't happen in a straight line. There will be regressions, moments when you'll revert to the old pattern, as if nothing has changed. This doesn't mean failure. It means the process is happening. Jung observed that often. The most intense relapses come right before significant breakthroughs. It's as if the unconscious makes one last attempt to maintain the status quo before giving in. Huberman would explain this as the phenomenon where old circuits, when threatened by new patterns, temporarily intensify their responses. It's the old fighting the new. It's expected. It's part of the process. The difference between those who transform and those who stay stuck isn't the absence of relapses. It's the persistence despite them. And here's the final truth I need to tell you. The deeply feeling woman's mistake in love isn't a character flaw. It's a neurological pattern formed in childhood, reinforced by culture, maintained by a lack of awareness. You're not to blame for having this pattern, but now that you know, you're responsible for transforming it. Jung wrote that integrating the animus is one of the most important tasks of female development. Not because women are incomplete, but because constant animus projection prevents access to one's own depth. Huberman has proven that the brain can change at any age. The circuits formed in childhood aren't destiny. They're a starting point. You can learn to love with all your intensity, without losing yourself in the other person. You can maintain your emotional depth without becoming a hostage to it. You can be the passionate woman you are, without it destroying your relationships. But this requires work. It requires awareness. It requires practice. The question isn't whether you're capable, it's whether you're willing. Now tell me in the comments, do you recognize this pattern in yourself? Do you love intensely and push people away? Or do you hold back and feel empty? Which side do you know better? And if you think I oversimplified the neuroscience or forced any connection with Jung, comment as well. Criticize. Question. This dialogue is what moves us forward. Don't forget to leave your like if this content opened your eyes to something new. And subscribe so you don't miss the next videos, because the journey of integration continues. Jung drew the map. Huberman is translating it into the language of the brain, and you are here, at this exact moment, ready to apply it. Science has validated what ancient wisdom always knew. The time has come to integrate. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. Thousands of deeply feeling women are discovering exactly what you've discovered today. They're doing the same work now. They're facing the same challenges. The difference is that now you have the map. Jung drew it. Huberman translated it into the language of the brain. And you have the courage to apply it. That's the synthesis that transforms. Deep psychology plus modern neuroscience. 100-year-old wisdom plus discoveries from Stanford. The old and the new, united in service of your transformation. Use it well.